This year, it'll only be 10 of us, Lena said, her eyes fixed on the notepad she was filling with scribbles. Her pen flew across the page like she was chairing some board meeting instead of sitting at my oak table in the front room on a quiet Tuesday night. My parents, my brothers, their wives, and the kids. Plus us, obviously. So, you'll be the host. Her words rolled out as if they were fact, not suggestion. She didn't stop to see how I felt about it, just flipped to a fresh page of her notes and kept going. Dad doesn't touch pork anymore, so we'll need turkey and maybe some beef. Mom likes the spare bedroom upstairs, she says it's quieter back there. The kids can stay in the sunroom. You still have those fold-out couches, right? I sat with my fingers wrapped around my water glass, the coolness pressing into my palms, letting her stack one expectation on top of another without so much as looking my way. Mark sat there too, my son, tapping his fork against his plate without saying a word. He didn't step in, but then again, he never does. Lena kept going, moving from menus to sleeping arrangements, and then on to decorations. Oh, and maybe skip the candles this year. My brother's daughter gets headaches. You could make up for it with more lights outside instead, she added, like I was her assistant instead of her mother-in-law. I took a careful sip of water, set the glass down on the coaster, and smiled. But it wasn't the polite smile I'd trained myself to wear for years. It was the kind of smile that shows up when you know something no one else at the table is expecting. Perfect, I said. I'll be traveling this Christmas. You and your family can handle it. Lena froze, her pen suspended mid-stroke. Mark finally lifted his eyes from his fork. I'm sorry, what? Lena asked, her tone sharp now, like I'd skipped the line she'd written for me. I'll be gone from December 23rd until New Year's Day, I answered evenly, so you and your family can celebrate however you want. The room went silent. Not mad silent, not hurt silent, but stunned, like the sound of glass shattering on tile. Lena blinked, waiting for me to crack a smile, to say I was joking, to soften it somehow. But I didn't. I stood, gathered the side plates, and carried them into the pantry and stove room. Neither one of them followed. I rinsed the dishes under warm water, dried my hands on the towel, and hung it neatly back on the rack. Lena still hadn't spoken. Mark looked like he wanted to, but nothing came out. What made this moment different wasn't just what I said, it was that this time I meant every word. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the tiniest bit guilty. I used to love Christmas. Back when it felt like we were all in it together. Back when Lena would ask if she could bring dessert and actually arrive with a homemade pie. When Mark would lug in the tree, needles scattered all across the carpet, grumbling the whole time but still doing it, then hug me after dinner and say, "It smells like Christmas in here, Mom." Those holidays weren't flawless, but they were genuine. Everyone pitched in, and even when there was stress, there was gratitude too. But something changed. What began with, "Would you mind if," shifted into, "We'll be coming over." The offers to help faded into excuses. Too tired, too busy, too much else going on. The praise kept coming, but the effort fell squarely on me. Last year, I cooked 3 main dishes, 4 sides, and 2 desserts, because Lena's bakery schedule was just too demanding. I watched the kids while they shopped for last-minute gifts. I cleaned every dish while the rest of them sat around sipping cider and laughing. And when it was all over, they posted the perfect picture online. Matching sweaters, smiling kids, Mark with his arm around Lena. The caption read, "Family Christmas at Mom's." Not a single mention of the woman who had cooked, cleaned, and made it all possible from behind the camera. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, hugged them goodbye, and listened as they told me how amazing everything had been. Then I stood alone in a quiet house, surrounded by crumbs, aching bones, and not a trace of real thanks. So when Lena announced, without even glancing up, that I'd be hosting again this year, this time for her entire family too, I knew I had reached my limit. The very next day, the group text came through. A cheerful little message full of emojis. "Can't wait for Christmas. Thanks in advance." "Helen, you're the best." No question mark. No pause to see if I was okay, or if I even wanted to do it. That was when it hit me. I wasn't being asked. I was being assigned. For years, I'd been the cook, the decorator, the cleaner, the babysitter, the faceless background of their holiday snapshots. But me, the person, I'd disappeared. They wanted the house, the warmth, the meals. But they didn't want me. And that's when I made my decision. No explanations. No arguments. Just a choice I had every right to make. I was stepping back. So when Lena sat there with her pen scratching, rattling off food lists and sleeping arrangements like she was reading from a menu, I finally said what I'd been holding back. "Perfect. I'll be traveling this Christmas. You and your family can handle it." And this time I didn't take it back. That night, lying in bed, I thought about all the years I'd shoved my own needs aside just to keep everyone else comfortable. The countless hours cleaning washrooms, ironing tablecloths, setting up extra chairs. The money poured into turkeys, pies, and groceries no one ever reimbursed. And I realized I wasn't even angry anymore. I was finished. Finished with the cycle of expectations dressed up as tradition. Finished mistaking silence for kindness. Finished confusing guilt with love. This Christmas, things would be different. This year, I was finally choosing me. When I was younger, Christmas felt like its own present. The work seemed lighter because we shared it. Mark still lived at home, and even after he moved out, he'd come back in early December to help me wrestle the tree inside. We'd untangle strings of lights, laugh about the ones that flickered or stayed dark, and eventually get them strung up anyway. Lena used to bring dessert, too. Pumpkin pie, a tray of cookies, something homemade, something she was proud to add. She'd come into the pantry and stove room, flour on her sweater, smiling because she was part of it. We'd swap recipes, and it felt like family in the truest way. Even Mark's voice was different back then. He'd walk through the door with his arms full of bags or gifts and say, "Smells like Christmas in here, Mom." And it really did. The tree glowed in the corner, soft music played in the background, and the whole house wrapped itself in warmth. Yes, I was tired, but it was a kind of tired that felt worth it. The kids were still little back then, running through the corridors in their pajamas, too wound up to fall asleep on Christmas Eve. We'd roll out sugar cookies together, and they'd get more frosting on their hands and cheeks than on the cookies themselves. I'd snap photos and slide them into albums, telling myself I'd want every single memory someday. But over the years, something began to change. It started small. One year, Lena asked if her parents could join us for Christmas dinner. Just a few hours, she promised. Of course, I said yes. I thought it would be lovely to have everyone gathered around the table. The next year, they stayed for the whole day. Soon it stretched into the entire weekend. Before long, it turned into the week leading up to Christmas, and sometimes even rolled past New Year's. They brought more with them, too, siblings, cousins, even friends passing through. Guest rooms filled, then couches, and eventually even the floor. At first, I didn't say a word. I kept reminding myself, this is what family does. But as the numbers grew, the helping hands didn't. Bags were dropped in the hallway, and the first question I'd hear was, "What's for dinner?" If anything was missing, it was always, "Helen, could you pick that up tomorrow?" as if the store only existed for me. The grocery bills doubled, then tripled. The electric climbed from endless showers, extra laundry, and running the heat non-stop. I noticed the water heater struggling, and I was the one settling for lukewarm showers after everyone else had gone to bed. No one ever offered to share the costs. What they did give were compliments. "You always make Christmas magical, Helen. We just love coming here." Nice words, but words don't scrub pans or roast turkeys. Not one of them offered to take over the main dish the next year. Not one reached for a sponge when the sink was overflowing. I can still see last year's pantry and stoveroom in my mind. Pots stacked high, counter sticky from spills, the smell of roasted ham still clinging to the air. Lena's parents sat at the table playing cards while I stood with an aching back, scraping at pans. Mark was in the sunroom, glued to football. The kids had scattered with their new toys. I remember standing there, hands deep in soapy water, staring at my reflection in the dark pantry and stoveroom window. Steam curling my hair, cheeks flushed from the oven's heat, and thinking, this isn't joy anymore. This is work I never signed up for. But I swallowed it. I'd done that most of my life, kept quiet to keep the peace. One year, Lena's brother stayed on even after everyone else left. He said the flight was cheaper later in the week. Every morning I'd find him at my table, waiting for breakfast. And every morning, I made him eggs and toast because I didn't know how to say no. There were the little things, too. Lena's mom demanding the best mattress. Her dad expecting decaf coffee ready at all hours. My home turned into their hotel, and I became the unpaid staff. Each year I told myself maybe next time it would be easier. Maybe they'd notice. Maybe Mark would see how drained I was. Maybe Lena would realize how much I was carrying. But they never did. The expectations only grew while my strength ran thin. What had once been a single holiday meal stretched into days of cooking. A weekend grew into 9 days. What began as love slowly twisted into something that felt like being taken for granted. Of course, I adored the grandkids. Their laughter still lit me up. But it was hard to soak in when I was racing between the oven and the laundry room just to keep everything from falling apart. I'd watch them tearing into gifts while I leaned in the doorway, dish towel in hand, already tallying up the work waiting in the pantry and stove room. It wasn't that I didn't want them here. It was that the joy had been replaced with obligation. My Christmas had become their convenience. And the older I got, the heavier it all became. My back screamed. My knees ached from hours on my feet. I'd collapse into bed after midnight, only to drag myself up before dawn to start all over again. Nobody noticed. To them, it was just the way Christmas was supposed to be. And that's when it hit me. They didn't see my effort anymore, they saw it as tradition. And in their eyes, tradition was mine to uphold while they simply enjoyed it. That's when joy slipped through my fingers and exhaustion settled in its place. Last Christmas is the one that opened my eyes completely. 14 people in the house. Every room occupied, couches unfolded, air mattresses spilling into corners. I cooked from sunrise to nightfall, cleaned till my hands stung, and still never caught up. By the second day, my legs ached so badly I had to perch on a stool just to keep chopping vegetables. I remember standing at the stove, oven blazing behind me, every burner crowded with boiling pots, when Lena's mother walked through asking if I had honey for her tea. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't even notice the sweat rolling down my face. She just set her cup down and walked away. Lena's father was sprawled in the sunroom, watching old westerns like he owned the place, asking Mark to fetch him another blanket because of a draft. I nearly laughed, because that draft had been there for years, it only mattered now that it inconvenienced him. Her brothers acted no better than guests at a motel. Towels abandoned on the floor, detergent wasted in the wash, coolers stacked in my basement storage. I tried to keep the house steady, but every time I picked up after them, I felt another bit of joy drain away. Mark stayed busy with the kids, which I could understand, but it also meant he didn't see me. He'd chase the little ones, then flop onto the couch with his phone, half watching the game. When I asked him to take out the trash, he told me he'd do it later. Later never came. Lena wasn't much better. She spent most of her time glued to her phone, snapping pictures of the kids and posting them online. Every so often, she'd look up just long enough to tell me how good the food smelled, but she never once offered to pitch in, never said, "Here, let me take that." By the time dinner was served, I was running on fumes. 14 plates, glasses, forks, knives, and spoons, multiplied by 3 meals a day. I scrubbed until my back screamed and my arms trembled. The only thought keeping me moving was, if I stop, I may not start again. When the last person finally walked out after 6 long days, I was left staring at a pantry and stove room that looked like a storm had torn through. Crumbs in every corner, trash bags stacked against the wall, sticky stains across the counters. I was so worn out I just leaned on the sink, letting the weight of it all sink into me. One woman cleaning up after 13, and not a single one of them thought twice about leaving it all behind. That night, I nearly collapsed. I sat on the edge of my bed and couldn't stand again for the longest time. My legs buzzed with exhaustion, and I thought, what if I can't do this next year? What if my body won't let me? I should have spoken up then, but I didn't. I kept quiet, worried I'd sound ungrateful for having family under my roof. I whispered to myself, next year will be better. Maybe they'll help more. But they never did. This past November, the group text came in. A cheerful message from Lena, decorated with Christmas tree emojis and way too many exclamation points. We'll all be at your house. Helen, thanks in advance. You're the best. No question. No hesitation. Just a decision made for me. I stared at the screen, and it hit me like a punch, all the years of late nights ironing tablecloths, early mornings roasting turkeys, baking pies, folding napkins, it hadn't meant anything. It never even crossed their minds that I might not be able to keep it up. Mark didn't say, "Mom, is that okay with you?" Lena's brothers didn't offer to bring food or suggest renting a place of their own. Nothing. That one message told me everything I needed to know. In their eyes, I wasn't a host. I was the provider. Just another piece of the backdrop to their holiday photos. I closed the message without replying. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the truth settling in. I'd been taken for granted, year after year, and I had let it happen. I thought back to the nights I slipped money into Mark's pocket when bills were tight. The weekends I babysat so he and Lena could get away. The grocery runs I covered without a word, not wanting to embarrass them. None of it mattered now. Not because it wasn't generous, but because to them, it was invisible. They didn't see me. They only saw what I gave. That night, I lay awake, replaying every holiday, every sacrifice, every time I'd chosen silence over speaking up. And the truth became clear. If I didn't draw the line now, the line would never exist. If I said yes again, I'd still be standing at that sink 10 years from now, older, weaker, and still ignored. So when Lena sat across from me at dinner and said, "Of course you'll host," my answer was already decided. "Perfect," I said. "I'll be traveling this Christmas. You and your family can handle it." And this time, I meant it. That night in the wrecked pantry and stove room, when I nearly collapsed, it had felt like no one saw me standing there. Have you ever felt like that? If you're listening to this and haven't liked or subscribed yet, I honestly don't know what you're waiting for. At the very least, drop a comment below and tell me why not, because sometimes it feels like doing all the work and getting none of the thanks. Later that evening, I sat alone at the pantry and stove room table. The house was finally quiet, but my thoughts weren't. I poured myself a cup of tea, set it down, and just stared at the steam curling upward. After a while, I pulled an old spiral notebook from the drawer. I hadn't written in it in years, but suddenly, I needed to put it all down. On the first page, I wrote at the top, "What I've given." I started with money. 3 years ago, Mark called late one night, his water heater had broken, and they couldn't afford to fix it. I wrote him a check for $900 and told him not to worry about paying me back anytime soon. He never did, and I never brought it up. Another time, when Lena was trying to get her little business off the ground, I quietly slipped a $200 into an envelope and tucked it into her purse. She cried and hugged me, and I brushed it off like it was nothing, just so she wouldn't feel guilty. Then groceries. I remembered all the times they showed up with just a pie from the store or a small box of cookies, and the rest was left to me. I thought about last December, standing at the checkout with 3 turkeys, 2 hams, vegetables, milk, eggs, butter, sugar, nearly $350 gone in one trip. Not once did anyone offer to split the bill. Childcare filled another page. Entire weekends spent watching the kids so Mark and Lena could go to concerts or take trips. I never complained, I adore my grandkids, but looking back, I realized how many nights I sat rocking a crying baby while they were off posting photos from a lake or a show. And the cooking, the cleaning, there weren't enough lines in that notebook to hold it all. Every year, I was up before dawn to get the meal started. I scrubbed until my knuckles ached. I ironed and folded while they lounged and watched movies. I cleaned washrooms before and after their visits, just so they never had to think about it. By the time I set the pen down, 2.5 pages were filled. I leaned back and stared at the words, and they echoed in my head, they don't really want me. They want what I provide. The thought stung, but it also cut through the fog I'd been living in. My place at the table didn't matter. My presence didn't matter. As long as the house was warm, the food was hot, and the beds were made, I was optional. I closed the notebook and felt something I hadn't felt in years, clarity. Then I opened my laptop and typed into the search bar, Christmas getaways in Vermont. I didn't know exactly what I was searching for, only that it had to be away from here, away from the endless lists, the noise, and the weight of everyone else's expectations. I needed space to breathe, someplace quiet where the only schedule was the one I chose for myself. When the search results popped up, I scrolled through page after page of cottages tucked into the Green Mountains. Each picture showed verandas draped in snow, fireplaces with stone hearths, little rocking chairs sitting empty on wide decks. One of them stopped me. It wasn't flashy, not some big log mansion with hot tubs and 5 bedrooms. It was small. 2 rooms, simple and tucked near a winding stream. The photos showed a swing on the veranda, just wide enough for one person with a blanket on her lap. A brick hearth with logs stacked neatly to the side. Trees dusted in snow like powdered sugar, mountains rising in the distance. The description read, available December 23rd through January 2nd. My heart gave a little jolt. It felt like it had been left there waiting for me, like the universe had saved that window of time just so I could finally claim it. I clicked through every photo slowly. A compact pantry and stoveroom with open shelves and a little wooden table. A bed dressed in a quilt, folded carefully at the foot, like someone had taken the time to make it welcoming. A window looking out over the trees, no blinds, no distractions, just the mountain view filling the frame. No television. No clutter. No reminders of anyone else's needs. Just stillness. The price wasn't cheap, but it wasn't unreachable either. And for once in my life, I wasn't going to talk myself out of it. I wasn't going to say, maybe later, or, I'll do it next year. I wasn't going to pour money into everyone else's gifts while telling myself I didn't need anything. I pulled my credit card out of my wallet, typed in the numbers, and hit book now. When the confirmation page appeared, I sat staring at the screen. My chest fluttered, half nervous, half thrilled, like I had just done something daring, almost reckless. But underneath that nervousness, a deeper feeling spread through me, relief. It was the first purchase I had made in years that wasn't for anyone else. Not groceries for a family gathering. Not toys for the grandkids. Not surprise gifts for Mark and Lena when money was tight. Just for me. I printed the receipt, folded it carefully, and slipped it between the pages of my notebook. I told myself I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I didn't need to announce it or defend it. This was my choice, mine alone, and that was enough. When I switched off the pantry and stoveroom light and headed for bed, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. For the first time in years, I wasn't lying awake worrying about cooking schedules or cleaning lists. For the first time, I had something to look forward to. This Christmas, I wouldn't be bent over a stove while everyone else laughed in the parlor. I wouldn't be scrubbing pans while the rest sipped cider and played cards. I wouldn't be the invisible hands holding the holiday together. This Christmas, I would be in the mountains, wrapped in quiet, and they would have to handle it themselves. Once the cottage was booked, everything else seemed to fall into place. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I just moved calmly, step by step, finally in charge of my own holiday. The first thing I did was print the group message Lena had sent, the cheerful one packed with emojis and the line that said, "Thanks in advance, Helen, you're the best." I folded it neatly and slipped it inside a blank white card. On the back, I wrote in steady letters, "This home will be unoccupied from December 23rd to January 2nd. Wishing you joy wherever you gather." No excuses, no guilt, no dramatic explanations. Just the plain truth. I walked down to the end of my walkway and taped the card to the side of the front gate, right where it would be seen first by anyone who pulled up. Not hidden. Not tucked away. Out in the open. When I stepped back and looked at it fluttering in the breeze, something inside me settled. For the first time in years, the responsibility wasn't on my shoulders anymore. I had told them. What they did with it was no longer mine to carry. Back inside, I started preparing the house, not for guests, but for absence. Usually by mid-December, the place would be draped in garlands, the banister wrapped in lights, stockings hung over the fireplace, a tree glowing in the corner. This year, all the boxes stayed packed away. No wreath on the door. No candles on the counters. No centerpiece on the oak table in the front room, just the clean polish of wood, bare and waiting. I stood in the pantry and stove room and ran a hand along the stove, thinking about all the years it had worked overtime for everyone else. This year, it would rest. In the parlor, I reached for the switch to the entry lantern, the same light I'd always left on for visitors, and flicked it off. That light had always been a signal of welcome. This year, the house would stay dark. I set the thermostat to away mode, locked the windows, and checked each door twice. I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. Packing was easier than I thought it would be. I didn't need much: warm clothes, a pair of boots, my toiletries, 2 books I'd been meaning to read. I folded everything carefully, zipped the suitcase shut, and set it by the door. For once, I wasn't packing extra casseroles, trays of cookies, or hidden gifts in the trunk. This time, it was only what I needed. My hand brushed over the holiday dress hanging in the closet, the one I wore every Christmas Eve. The fabric was soft under my fingertips, but I let it go. I didn't need it. No fancy dinners. No hosting duties. Just me and the quiet I had chosen. Before bed, I walked through each room one more time. I touched the counter, glanced at the bare fireplace mantel, and saw no regret, only calm. Outside, I looked back at the house from the walkway. The entry lantern off, windows dark, the yard still. For the first time in a long time, my home wasn't a stage set for other people's holiday. It was simply mine. That night, I slept deeper than I had in weeks. And the next morning, I woke without dread, without a list running through my head. I ate breakfast slowly, washed my single plate, and set it back in the cupboard, knowing it would stay clean until I returned. As December 23rd drew closer, I felt lighter every day. No one needed to be told. The card on the front gate spoke for me. That morning, I rolled my suitcase out to the car. I lifted it into the trunk, shut it, and took a final look at the house. Not a guilty look, just one to mark the moment. The moment I finally chose myself. I slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and pulled onto the road. As I passed the front gate, I caught sight of that white card fluttering in the breeze, plain and steady. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was finally going home, to myself. It felt like I was finally stepping into my own life, not just playing the role everyone else had written for me. With every mile that passed under my tires on the drive toward the Green Mountains, the heaviness I'd carried for years seemed to fall further and further behind me. The road curved through hills, then opened into long stretches of pine and bare trees, and with each turn I felt my shoulders loosen, my chest expand, my breath come easier. By the time I reached the edge of the mountains, the sky had settled into a soft winter gray, and the air carried that crisp, sharp bite that always makes you want to pull your coat tighter. The cottage was tucked into a ridge at the end of a winding road, the kind you almost miss if you're not looking closely. It sat quiet, wrapped in tall trees that looked like guardians standing watch. I parked, hauled my suitcase up the steps, and unlocked the door. The moment I stepped inside, I inhaled deeply. It smelled of wood and fresh pine, clean and simple. No TV blaring, no clutter on the counters, no voices calling out to me from across the house asking where something was. Just stillness. Just mine. That first evening, I kept things simple. I made myself a supper of eggs and toast, nothing fancy, nothing staged for anyone else, and sat near the small brick hearth. The firelight flickered against the walls, my book resting open in my hands. For once, I didn't glance at the clock. Time finally felt like it belonged to me again, stretching out slow and unhurried. Christmas Eve arrived, and right around the time I knew they'd be pulling into my walkway back home, my phone lit up on the table beside me. I didn't rush to it. I let it buzz, the glow flashing in the dim cottage light. I could picture everything playing out without needing to see it: 2 cars pulling up, kids half asleep in the back, trunks crammed with coolers and gift bags. They'd be expecting to step into a warm house with the entry lantern on, the smell of turkey or ham already drifting from the pantry and stoveroom. But what they found instead was a dark house, locked doors, closed windows, and not a single light waiting for them. I imagined Mark getting out first, stretching his back from the long drive before realizing the house was completely dark. Lena climbing out behind him, her parents trailing, arms folded tight, their faces pinched with irritation as they waited for me to appear at the door. But no one would. The first message came from Mark. *Mom, we're here. Where are you? Are you okay? Calmly, I stared at the words. Not with guilt, calm. I had left the card taped to the front gate. They knew where I was. They just hadn't believed me. Another text popped up, this one from Lena. We're outside. The gate's locked. Lights are off. Did you forget we were coming? I took a sip of tea, let the warmth settle in my chest, and set the phone back down. I hadn't forgotten. I had chosen. Minutes later, the tone shifted. This isn't funny. You're making a scene. Open the door. Then another, harsher, this is selfish. That word stared back at me. Selfish. After all the Christmases I'd worked until my knees throbbed, all the nights I'd scrubbed pans while everyone else played cards, after the money, the groceries, the babysitting, a single refusal, and suddenly I was selfish. I read the words once and then set the phone face down on the nightstand. No explanations this time. No defending myself. I could picture them standing there, trying to decide what to do. The kids whining from the cold, the adults muttering, probably pointing fingers at me. The food sitting in their trunk, the gifts waiting to be carried in. They had assumed, once again, that I'd be there to make it all happen. But now they'd have to scramble. Maybe they'd call a neighbor. Maybe they'd crowd into one of Lena's brother's places. Whatever it wasn't mine to solve. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow drifting down through the trees, white flakes catching in the light. The silence inside matched the silence outside. Not heavy silence, the kind that follows slamming doors and sharp words, but light, clean silence. Silence that felt like fresh air, like space finally cleared. I lit the small lamp by the bed, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and turned back to my book. The phone buzzed and buzzed, but I let it go. For years, I'd rushed to fill every gap, to fix every problem before it grew uncomfortable. If the kids were hungry, I cooked. If something was missing, I fetched it. If the house was messy, I stayed up until it sparkled again. I absorbed all the discomfort so no one else had to. But this time, the discomfort stayed with them. They could figure out meals, figure out beds, figure out their own kids. For once, I wasn't rushing in with the mop, the list, the smile to smooth it all over. Eventually, the phone went silent. I closed my book, leaned back in the chair, and let the fire crackle. My whole body felt lighter, as if someone had taken off a weight I hadn't realized I'd been dragging for decades. No one knocking, no one shouting from another room, no one asking what's for dinner. Just me, my choice, and the sound of wind through the trees. That night, I climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up under my chin. No tossing, no lists running through my head, no anxiety waiting for morning. I closed my eyes and drifted off in peace. For once, the holiday belonged to me. Selfish, that's the word they threw at me after 28 years of giving. 30 years of bending myself until I broke. And one decision for myself was selfish. If you've ever been called selfish for finally choosing your own well-being, you know exactly how that word burns. The next morning, Christmas morning, I woke in the cottage to quiet air and the faint scent of pine from the wood stacked near the fireplace. I moved slowly, made a small pot of coffee, poured it into a mug, and stepped outside. Snow covered the ground in a soft sheet, the mountains stretched wide and strong in the distance. For the first time in years, Christmas morning wasn't about rushing, it was about breathing. Later that day, my phone rang. Mrs. Carter, my neighbor from across the street, never missed a thing on our block. Her voice carried that familiar mix of gossip and kindness. "Well, Helen," she said, "you should have seen it. They all showed up at your house last night. Cars lined the street, kids tumbling out, everyone looking around. But when they saw that card on your front gate, you should have seen their faces." I could hear the laugh she tried to cover. She told me how, after some shuffling and raised voices, they all packed up and ended up at Lena's cousin's townhouse a few towns over. "Looked like they were packed in like sardines," she said. I pictured it, tight pantry and stove room, narrow counters, the kind of place where you can't open the oven all the way without bumping the fridge. The kids cranky from the long drive, adults stepping over each other. Mrs. Carter chuckled as she described how they'd tried to roast a turkey in that little oven. "Looked perfect outside," she said, "but when they cut it open, half of it was raw. They carved around the center, made do, and called it good enough. The kids wouldn't touch much of it." Lena's mom complained about the lack of space. I stood there on the veranda of my cottage, mug warm in my hands, and smiled, not out of spite, but out of release. For once, the chaos wasn't mine to manage. For once, the holiday wasn't mine to rescue. It was theirs. And the quiet, snowy mountains surrounding me felt like the greatest gift I had ever given myself. By midnight, in that cramped little apartment where they'd all crammed themselves, one of the air mattresses had gone flat. I imagined the arguments breaking out, voices raised over who would give up their spot, kids fussing, adults sighing, everyone tired from the long day. Mrs. Carter had said it was loud enough for the whole complex to hear. I just listened, nodded, and sat back in my cottage chair, pulling my blanket snug around me. I didn't feel smug, and I didn't feel sorry either. What I felt was distance, like I had finally stepped out of the storm. Their chaos wasn't mine to carry anymore. That Christmas was different in every possible way. There were no shouts from the pantry and stove room asking where I kept the serving spoons, no stacks of greasy pans waiting for me after dinner, no door slamming or kids racing through the corridors. Instead, there was snow outside my window, a warm cup of tea in my hand, and a simple meal I could eat slowly without being interrupted. That afternoon I fixed myself a bowl of soup and a handful of crackers. Nothing elaborate, but it filled me just fine. I realized, sitting at that small wooden table, how little it actually took to make me content. For so long, I had equated love with excess, big meals, dozens of side dishes, piles of presents. Yet here I was, satisfied with something as small and plain as soup. Later, I pulled on my boots and wandered down one of the trails behind the cottage. The snow crunched beneath me with each step, the air cold enough to sting my cheeks, and everything around me was quiet except for the stream bubbling nearby. I stopped and listened to it for a while, the steady sound of water cutting through silence. And right then, I realized I didn't miss a single thing. Not the kids bickering while I tried to keep a dozen timers straight in the pantry and stove room. Not Lena's mother directing me on which candles to light. Not her father complaining about the chairs. Not Mark drifting into the sunroom while I stood elbow-deep in dishes. None of it. Instead, what I felt was peace, a peace so deep it startled me. I hadn't tasted it in decades. That night, I made another cup of tea, settled near the fireplace, and let the wind move softly through the trees outside. I thought about how hard it had been to finally say no, about how guilt had clawed at me for months before I booked the cottage. But there, in that quiet room, I finally saw the truth. The guilt was never mine. It had been placed on me, year after year, like another dish to scrub, another burden to carry. Their Christmas went on without me, messy and overcrowded. Mine went on without them, steady and calm. Both happened, but only one of them felt like it belonged to me. I smiled into my blanket that night. For years I had poured out money, time, energy, everything I had, and I had never asked for much in return. But this time I asked for space. And space gave me back more than any wrapped gift ever could. 2 days after Christmas, my phone finally rang. Not a text. A call. Mark's name glowed on the screen. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring into voicemail, but I pressed accept. "Mom," he started, his voice tight. "You really left us hanging. That's not like you." I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence stretch until I could hear the noise in the background, children chattering, dishes clanking, the hum of a house still moving without me. Then I said, plain and even, "I told you where I'd be." It was written clear as day. He sighed. "You should have given us more warning. We drove all that way, and the kids were disappointed." "I'm glad the kids are all right now," I replied, calm as ever. No excuses. No guilt. He waited, expecting me to apologize, but I didn't. Eventually he muttered something about needing to go and hung up. A week later, he called again. This time his voice was lighter, almost breezy. "Mom," he said, "next time just let us know earlier so we can plan around your mood." That word clung to me. Mood. My boundary, my decision, my line in the sand, shrunk down in his eyes to nothing more than a passing mood. Something temporary. Something to wait out until I went back to normal. But it wasn't a mood. It was a choice. I didn't take a trip because I was moody, I told him. I took a trip because I was tired of being taken for granted. Silence filled the line. I could tell he didn't know what to say. Because if they called it a mood, they didn't have to face the truth. They didn't have to admit that I had stopped giving them what they'd always assumed would be theirs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let anger spill out. I just spoke clear. "I've mistaken guilt for love too many years. That ended this Christmas." There was a pause, then he mumbled something about checking in later and hung up. I set the phone down and sat quietly as sunlight filtered through the blinds. For the first time, I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't replay the conversation or wonder if I'd gone too far. I felt steady. The days that followed felt lighter. I started cleaning out the storage loft, not frantically, not fueled by anger, just one box at a time. I pulled down bins of holiday decorations I hadn't touched in years. Strings of lights that no longer worked. Plastic tubs full of ornaments someone else had insisted I needed. Folding tables I only dragged out when the crowd came. I kept a few things, the wooden ornament Mark carved in school, the ceramic angel my mother gave me decades ago. The rest, I loaded into my car. Some went to the church rummage sale. Some to the shelter. Quietly, without announcement. It wasn't for them. It was for me. The basement storage that once groaned under bins stacked to the ceiling suddenly had space. I could walk through without weaving around piles meant to serve everyone else's comfort. And as I worked, I thought about all the years I had held on to things just in case. Linens for guests. Extra chairs for dinners. Ornaments to decorate for an audience that never saw the work behind it. Letting it go felt like shedding layers of obligation I never asked for. I wasn't angry. I was finished. Finished keeping things only to be noticed after the fact. Finished holding on to reminders of exhaustion instead of joy. Finished bending myself around expectations that were never mine to begin with. When I looked around my house, lighter now, it finally felt like it belonged to me again. Mark didn't call again right away. Lena didn't either. I figured they were still spinning the story, finding ways to explain it to themselves that didn't make them uncomfortable. Maybe they told people I'd been overwhelmed. Maybe they said I wasn't feeling well. But I knew the truth, and that was enough. This time, I didn't let their version of my life matter more than my own. Winter passed slowly, quietly. And with it came the steady relief of knowing I hadn't broken my promise to myself. I had feared I might regret it. That the weight of tradition would pull me back in. But I didn't. Not at New Year's. Not on birthdays. And not even when Easter rolled around. Not on Mother's Day. Not on the quiet days when the phone never rang. For Easter, I baked myself a little pie, set the table with just one plate, one fork, and a napkin. I ate slowly, savoring each bite in the stillness. It didn't feel empty. It felt calm. When Mother's Day arrived, there was no envelope in the front gate, no call from Mark. Instead, I came across a picture online, Mark and Lena on some beach, grinning for the camera. The caption read, *much needed family reset. And for once, I didn't feel stung. I felt unburdened. Unburdened from demands I could never quite fulfill. Unburdened from traditions that had drained me dry. I realized how many years I had wasted waiting for them to notice, to thank me. Waiting had only left me weary. So I stopped waiting. That spring, I joined a Saturday morning walking group at the park. At first, I felt shy, but soon I was laughing with strangers who became companions. We chatted about gardens, weather, little stories about our families, light conversations, never heavy. Those walks became something I looked forward to, a place where I didn't have to be the planner or the caretaker. I could simply walk, breathe, and belong. I started giving myself other small gifts, too. I painted the guest room a soft blue, a color I'd always loved but never chosen because it didn't suit anyone else's taste. I lined herbs along my windowsill and folded them into my own meals. I bought books and let them pile high on my nightstand without apology. By the time September came, I was already sketching out new plans. With no guilt tugging at me, I booked another cottage, not in the Smokies this time, but beside a quiet lake just a few hours away. It had a wood stove, a little dock, no Wi-Fi. The listing read, perfect for reflection, and I knew that's exactly what I wanted. Marking those days on the calendar felt like finally claiming a holiday for myself. Then November arrived, and as if on cue, Mark's text appeared. You're still hosting Christmas, right? No hello. No pause to ask. Just the same expectation, softened only by tone. I read it twice. And this time, I didn't falter. No, but I hope it goes well, I typed back. Nothing more. No explanations, no excuses, no space for bargaining. I set the phone down and felt no heaviness. Only lightness. Because the moment you stop performing for everyone else, you finally begin to live. And that's exactly what I was doing. Living.
That was my story. What do you think about it? Would you have acted the same way or chosen differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to the Keeping Secrets channel for more stories like this. Oh, and one more thing. This story is our little secret, so shh.